At the United Auto Workers, what they've done to their people is horrible. They want to do this all-electric nonsense where the cars don't go far, they cost too much. If I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars.
Trump's pledge to slap a 100% tariff on cars made in Mexico by Chinese companies went in one ear of the left-wing media, and out the other, they only heard one word: bloodbath.
And boy, did they absolutely run with it. Trump says country faces bloodbath if Biden wins in November. In Ohio, campaign rally, Trump says there will be a bloodbath if he loses November election. Again, Trump says some migrants are not people and warns of a bloodbath if he loses.
President Trump responded on Truth Social saying the fake news media made a big deal out of the word bloodbath, knowing that it was about our shrinking auto manufacturing business and the fact that they use the same name all the time. They are so bad. Joining us now with a reaction, Fox News contributor and host of the Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio, Guy Benson, along with Fox News contributor Lisa Boothe. Lisa, I end with you. I start with you. This was a lie that the media made up and ran with, and the White House did too, and Jen Psaki and NBC News. It's just disgraceful, but kind of speaks to how craven they are.
Yeah, Dagan, I'm so glad you put it that way. This was a lie. This is a lie. They're still repeating it, right? This isn't just being taken out of context. This is a blatant lie by the media. And to your point, this just shows the level of dishonesty that Republicans, that Donald Trump is going to be up against this election cycle. And Eric Holder, Obama's former attorney general, was on HBO Real Time on Friday. And when asked about the bad poll numbers that Joe Biden is facing, he said, you know what? When the media turns its focus on Donald Trump, we'll be fine. Because he knows that the media is going to lie. He knows that the media is willing to propagandize for the left. And we've seen these lies before. We saw it with the Russia hoax. We saw it with Charlottesville as well. And I also think it shows how desperate they are with Joe Biden facing as bad of poll numbers as he is.
You know, it's going to be harder to do that, Guy, because with Twitter, a lot more people get the truthful information. They watch the whole clip in context, where in 2020 they didn't have that option. But this is not the first time they've done it, Guy. When Donald Trump said, I'm going to be a dictator for a day, and he was talking about closing the border, the same press ran what Donald Trump says he's going to be a dictator. So this is one more play out of their playbook that the American people don't buy.
It's the boy who cried wolf syndrome on steroids for Donald Trump. And look, I wish we were having a robust debate over the actual underlying policy. Tariffs, that'd be great to do. But the reporters don't want to do that. They're too lazy. They're like, oh, bloodbath, let's run with that no matter how dishonest it is. And here's the thing. I do think it helps Trump. Because if you want Donald Trump to say something genuinely offensive, wait 5 minutes, right? He's going to at some point. You don't have to invent something and then rush out there to try to hammer him, because then people say these are not reliable narrators. These are not truthful people. And so there's an inoculation effect against him. And so their zeal for resistance and their herd mentality leads them to stampede in one direction. And I think they are inadvertently, of course, helping Donald Trump again.
But it can go further than this, as we saw in front of the Supreme Court today, where the voice that says this portrayal of Trump is inaccurate, or the laptop is real, that voice gets silenced. So dangerously so, in violation of our First Amendment. Moving on to this, sources inside the White House telling NBC that Biden has grown angry and anxious over his re-election bid. Aides claiming that Biden shouts and swears at them over his plummeting poll numbers. But National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has apparently been marked safe from Biden's terror.
The quote is, he began to shout and swear. So when he does that, is he shouting and swearing about Netanyahu or about Hamas or about his poll numbers?
This is the when did you stop beating your spouse question, because I don't think he ever did that. And so, well, you use that as the premise of your question, which is when he does that. I've never seen him do that, shout or swear in response to that. So from my perspective, that particular report is not correct.
it almost seemed like a plant, this NBC report guy, that it was trying to make Biden seem like he's in charge. And instead, I just read it and thought, yeah, he's just an angry old man who's just an angry old man.
Well, I mean, he did call
it
someone.
rings true.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Guy.
It rings true because I think it is true, right? I mean, they're calling, I guess, the White House NBC News liars over this. But here's the issue. We have seen Joe Biden, when he rarely takes questions that he doesn't like, he gets ornery and angry. He raises his voice. Mm-hmm. And he also called Peter Doocy himself a curse word on an open mic. So the idea that, I've never, heavens to Betsy, I could never imagine Joe Biden doing this. We've seen him do it. It's just more gaslighting. Come on.
It's interesting. I'm at polls, but I'm not going to change my policy to make people a little happier with my ideas. Lisa, I'm going to go another place with you because I want to get your take on this. Can anyone explain why former presidents are holding private meetings with world leaders? Obama dropping in on the UK's prime minister today as a new report details Biden's rivalry with his former boss. Axios claiming Biden often mumbles Obama would be jealous of his accomplishments. So, Lisa, what do you make of this? I mean, again, Biden's overseas meeting with the UK, but Joe Biden seems to be consumed with Obama and how he's doing compared to his former boss.
Yeah, and sorry, Guy, I didn't hear your name called earlier with that. Well, Sean, it kind of does raise these questions, right? Because a lot has been made of who is actually running the government right now. I mean, we saw with Secretary Lloyd Austin, he didn't bother to tell the White House when he was in the hospital. Now you've got Obama going and meeting with heads of state as if he's the head of state, right? While the rest of America doesn't think that Joe Biden is with it with his mental faculties right now. So I think it really does raise these questions about, who is running our government right now. And then, two, just sort of pours more gasoline on this fire of Joe Biden and Obama not really getting along. Of Obama pushing him out in 2016 when Joe Biden wanted to run, of, that infamous quote, don't underestimate Joe Biden's ability to F things up, which we have sure figured out, given this administration and this presidency. So a lot to unpack here and also raises questions why there's not more reporting about what was actually discussed during the meeting with the UK prime minister. So I don't know. It's very strange, Sean.
Real quick, what were you going to say about Biden being old and angry?
Well, I was going to say that he did call someone a dog-faced pony soldier, so I could see that happening. But he has every right to be worried. His approval ratings are worse than Jimmy Carter at this point. So if I was him, I'd be freaking out too.
Guy, 30 seconds. Quick take on Obama meeting with the UK Prime Minister and Biden comparing himself to his former boss.
I mean, if this wasn't sanctioned by Biden and the White House, and this is Obama out there freelancing, I think it'll probably add to one of those volcanic outbursts from Joe Biden. He won't like it. I would just warn Rishi Sunak, who is the British Prime Minister, who's in real trouble polling-wise. When Barack Obama comes to help you politically, often it doesn't work out well. So be careful what you wish for.
All right.
Two words, Chris Christie. Nobody will ever forgive him for that.
The famous hug.
Guy Benson, Lisa Boothe, always good to see you two.